So today we're going to explore a really fascinating connection, one that stretches all the way from the brains of nuns deep in prayer to some pretty amazing technology that lets you train your very own brainwaves. It's a journey into mapping the mind and then figuring out how to guide it.
Okay, let's just dive right in. Now, I know this diagram looks incredibly complex, but it's a serious scientific attempt to map what's happening in the brain during a spiritual experience. And it really gets to the core question for us today. Can we actually observe, measure, and maybe even influence the most profound states of our own minds?
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start by mapping the mystical brain, then we'll get into how the brain literally changes itself. From there, we'll dive into how you can train your brainwaves, look at the toolkit of protocols clinicians use, and finally, we'll ground it all in the science behind it.
All right, let's start with this huge idea, the quest to scientifically map what is going on inside our heads during these moments of really deep spiritual connection.
And this ambition, well, it's captured by a field with a pretty cool name, neurotheology. It's all about trying to build a bridge between the hard science of the lab and, say, the prayer mat.
So what neurotheology really tries to do is use our modern neuroscience tools, things like fMRI scans, to study the brain during meditation or prayer or even trance states. The goal here isn't to prove or disprove anyone's belief, it's to understand the brain activity that's happening behind these incredibly powerful human experiences.
So, what have they actually found? Well, what you're looking at here is the kind of data they're working with. These are functional brain scans, and they measure brain activity by looking at blood flow. And what they show is that when people enter these really unique states of mind, their brain activity changes in very specific observable ways.
So, for example, when they studied Franciscan nuns deep in prayer, they saw this ramp up of activity in the frontal lobes. That's kind of like the brain's focus and concentration center. But in contrast, when they looked at experienced mediums in a trance state, they saw decreased activity in the areas tied to cognitive processing. And here's the really wild part. While in that state, they actually produced writing that was more complex than what they could do normally.
Okay, so those are fascinating snapshots, for sure. But how can a practice, something you do over and over, lead to a lasting change in the brain? Well, this brings us to a core principle of all neuroscience. The answer, in a word, is neuroplasticity. This is just the fundamental, amazing ability of our brain to reorganize itself, to literally form new neural connections based on what we do, what we think, and what we experience.
And really, this isn't some kind of magic trick. It's just learning. It's the same exact process happening, whether you're mastering a new language, learning to play the guitar, or getting better at a meditative practice. You are physically changing your brain. Experience is literally sculpting the architecture of your mind.
Okay, so if the brain can change through experience, the next logical question has to be, can we guide that change more directly? Can we be more intentional about it? And this is where a technology called neurofeedback comes into the picture.
The best way to think about it is like a mirror, but for your brain. It uses sensors to read your brainwaves and then gives you feedback in real time, usually with sounds or something visual on a screen. By seeing or hearing what your brain is doing from moment to moment, you can actually learn to influence its patterns.
It all works on this simple but really powerful three-step loop. First, sensors measure your brain's electrical activity. Second, software gives you feedback. So, what's that actually like? Well, imagine you're sitting there watching a simple game on a screen, but you don't have a controller. When your brain produces the brainwaves you're aiming for, let's say calm focus, the game moves forward. The second you get distracted, it stops. Your brain, almost on its own, starts to figure out what it needs to do to win. It's learning through direct, immediate reinforcement.
So, what does this actually look like in practice? I mean, how does it work in a clinical setting? Well, neurofeedback isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It's really more like a whole toolkit, filled with different training plans, or what they call protocols.
This is so important. A trained clinician doesn't just, hook someone up to a machine and press go. They use what's called symptom-based clinical thinking. That means they assess a person's specific needs, their goals, and then they choose a protocol that's designed to target the exact brainwave patterns that are most relevant.
So let's look at a few big families of these protocols. For someone dealing with trauma, a clinician might use an alpha-theta protocol. This one helps guide them into a deeply relaxed, almost dreamlike state where processing can happen more gently. Now, for a student who just can't seem to focus, a beta/SMR protocol acts like a workout for the attention centers of the brain.
And then there's something like morphology feedback, which is kind of like a general tune-up, aiming for overall brain stability and better self-regulation. The choice is always a clinical judgment call.
And this right here, this is absolutely key. The entire process is grounded in data. It's not just about how a person feels subjectively. It's about linking that brain training directly to specific, measurable changes.
So to actually do this, clinicians use these standardized assessment tools to track progress over time. For example, if the goal is to improve focus for someone with ADHD, they might use the Adult ADHD Self-Report Scale. If it's anxiety, maybe the GAD-7. This creates a really clear, data-driven connection between the neurofeedback sessions and changes in real-world symptoms.
Now, with all of this exciting potential, it is absolutely vital that we ground this technology in clinical reality. We need to be responsible about it.
And here's the crucial point. Any responsible provider is going to emphasize that neurofeedback is an adjunctive service. It's not a cure. It is one tool that can be part of a broader care plan, and it should never, ever replace medical or psychological treatment. It requires proper training, clinical supervision, and a real commitment to tracking progress with data.
And we have to be honest here. The science is still very much a work in progress. While a lot of the findings are super promising, the field faces some real methodological challenges. Researchers are still working hard to untangle the effects of different protocols, to control for the placebo effect, and to conduct bigger, more robust studies.
And that really brings us to the right mindset for all of this. It's about being able to hold two truths at the same time, that there are incredibly promising findings here, and that the field faces some very real, very legitimate concerns. It's a perspective of both optimism and caution.
And that leaves us with this huge final thought. We started by looking at these ambitious attempts to map the most profound human experiences. We ended with a practical tool for self-regulation. So as our ability to both read and train the activity of our own brains gets more and more sophisticated, what new possibilities does that unlock for our focus, our well-being, and really the future of human potential?